Hello, hello, and good morning. Welcome back for another episode of Sit Down, Stand Up. Dang it, I missed it again. Whatever. Anyway, I am vindicated. I am here with my mighty mug of marketing, and I am vindicated. For those of you who don't know, you should check out yesterday's episode, but I went into this a little bit of a tangent about how decades and the trends of decades kind of bleed into the next one a little bit. So what was the 90s, early 90s were more reflective of like the tail end of the 80s versus like feeling like their own decade. But then I was like, well, wait a minute. But I think Friends came out like earlier on, and those were showing, and I mentioned that the hairstyle, I didn't describe the hairstyle. I said it did this thing, and that's not very helpful. So I don't know what I was thinking in my brain that I was somehow communicating in any effective way. But if you know, you know. I mean, just look up, Friends and look at Courtney Cox and Jennifer Aniston's hairstyle, and that's what kind of became, I wouldn't call it normalized, but that style, a little more subdued. It still has body, layered, little. I mean, I think it looks more, I want to say sophisticated, civilized. That's the word. The 80s hair was not civilized. Anyway, I'm vindicated because I did go back and I looked, and Friends came out. The first episode aired in 1994. So indeed, I was correct, Marty. 1991, 1992, and 1993 were completely like the 80s. It wasn't until 1994 that they suddenly became their own thing. Anyway, so my instincts were correct. I get tired of being right all the time. There's a lot of things I'm right about that I wish I wasn't right about. It's a burden. It's a burden I have to bear. But anyway, that's really all I had to say. That was the only thing. I don't usually go back and refer to older episodes, but that was just something that I just randomly was like, let me just see what it was. I was like, whoa, that's cool. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it takes like half the decade, but because that reflects a change. There was a trend towards that, and as I said, I remember distinctly that the poofy hair was still there, but it wasn't. It had been subdued significantly by the turn of the decade. So anyway, here's I don't even know what. That's a problem right now. I'm so old. I don't even know what the trends these days are. I don't know what the last I heard, we were doing the cigarette jeans, the really skinny pant legs. So you can't figure out how they got their foot through the bottom of the pant. It just I don't. And as somebody who grew up in the 80s, so like the early 80s, the had the MC Hammer, the parachute pants. Now I never wore those. Those struck me as more like fashion. But like fashion as in the fashion world, as in you will never wear any of this stuff, but we're deciding it's cool. It's not functional. It's kind of ludicrous in a lot of ways, but we're going to say that that's fashionable right now. So I didn't know anybody, actually, well, maybe there was one or two people who had parachute pants, but they really weren't all that big. They were big in Goof Troop. I remember that. So like if a character wore them in a show or a movie, they were cool, but I didn't really see a lot of them. Any of my friends wearing them. That wasn't really, because they're very distinct. I mean, it's not like boot cut jean versus straight leg jean where the style is kind of similar. I mean, these are legit. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna say I thought they were goofy back in the day. I was being told they were cool, and I was young, so I just assumed they were cool. But the baggy pants did become popular right around when I was looking at you didn't want high waters. You didn't want the pant leg, sitting at the ankle. You wanted it like kind of folded and creased over the shoe. And I remember I started working for S&K Menswear when I was in my senior year in high school. Because at that point I was wearing suits. I mean, that's a whole other thing, but I started wearing, I say I wore suits, but it was more about the look. I didn't actually have a suit at the time. I started wearing dress clothes, in a manner of speaking. I borrowed my dad's ties. I had some hand-me-down dress shirts. I didn't look particularly, like, you would not have taught me to be a very well-dressed business person with the kind of dress clothes I was wearing initially, because I didn't have a whole lot, because you just wear them for Sundays or special events or whatever. But it got to the point, there were several factors. One of them being, I had these crazy amounts of growth spurts pretty much up through high school, and up to about high school. I think at 9th or 10th grade, I kind of peaked right around. I kind of 6'1" ish, and then I grew another inch or inch and a half or so between then and the last amount of time that you have to grow. My tongue is doing weird things right now. I don't know what's going on. Can't say a word clearly. But for my formative years, I had these random growth spurts. My feet got bigger. Like within 2 or 3 weeks, I would be a different shoe size, or like even if it's a half a size, it's enough that the shoes become uncomfortable, and within half a year, they're not wearable anymore. So between that and we were a single family income, my mom wanted to stay home with the kids, and so there was me and my sister, and my mom. Yeah, she was home the entire time I went through schooling, which was fantastic. I didn't appreciate it as much then as I do now, being able to have that parent in the home. And my dad made decent money. He was a patent draftsman. He worked out of DC, and so it was a brutal hour and a half commute from where we were. It should have been 45 minutes, but Northern Virginia traffic is horrible, and it was even horrible back in the 80s. So, it made good money, but not good enough to like give me the latest and greatest, especially when I'm growing out of whatever I was wearing every, I would say 3 months or so. Like the shirt sleeves would start to become too short and everything. So anyway, I mean, it wasn't consistent. It was like every single year it was the exact same thing, but it was enough where you couldn't buy me clothes or shoes and think they would last me a year. And when you're on a budget like that, you kind of have to just buy whatever you can afford. And so for me, my trips to the shoe store were usually, it was Kmart was my shoe store. And even then, there were some, I crap you not, there were some Kmart shoes that were out of my price range. My mom, I remember we'd go in there and she'd say, okay, son, like you could pick from, you got these over here, you got these, there were like 5, usually about 5 that were in the price range. So even if can you imagine being in Kmart and being like, oh, I really like those over there. How about these over here, son? These are a little elegant. These Jordache 3 different color laces. I'm describing a pair of shoes that I actually did get, but I just remember there were some that were just outside. I mean, that's kind of like going to a thrift shop and being like, I'm sorry, we can't get that. It's a little too. It's a little out of my price range. Like that's just crazy to think about. But that's the way things were. So I never had the coolest, the latest and greatest. And even if I did get something that resembled it, it very rarely fit me very well. I had high waters most of the time. Now I'm not talking like Steve Urkel high waters. These weren't super hyped up, but they didn't have any break. And break is where the pant kind of lays on the shoe a little bit. And you ideally want a little bit of a break, even if it's, even if it fits well. You're not trying to go for the big baggy wrinkly look. You do want a little bit of a break. Most of mine had very little, if any, break. And so it was kind of a futile struggle trying to wear the cool thing, get the cool thing. And obviously I'm not paying for any of it, so I really can't complain. And I was always clothed. They were never threadbare. They were never in bad shape, but I was never going to be considered cool because of what I wore. In fact, it was kind of, I remember it wasn't terrifying. I was always excited to get a new pair of shoes, but somehow I always knew that like it was going to be rough the first day that I had them, because everybody at the bus stop was going to make fun of them. Bobos, that was the word, slander of my footwear. They would call them Bobos or just be like, what the crap are those? What brand are those? Just kind of, it was always going to be some derisive thing to make fun of the shoes. It was almost better just to have the old shoes because nobody would notice. But now it's like, hey, you got new shoes. We need to make fun of that. But that was part of what got me to the point where, it's a very small thing, but you just ignore them, or you just agree with them. You're like, yeah, I know they're Bobos. What are you going to do? Kmart special, baby. And that didn't necessarily feel good, but it did take the power out of it. They eventually stopped picking on me or bullying me because of what I wore, because I just didn't care. And really, I did have to come to grips with myself and just go, okay, this doesn't define me as a person, yada yada. I know that sounds like a lot of lofty thinking for a young kid, but whatever the childish version of that was, like, just look, son, I don't know, and that's not even funny. So we'll just move past that. But that was just something I had to adapt to and get used to, and so I got used to that. But it got tiresome, and there was that part of me going, okay, you know what? If I can't excel in something, if I can't be really good at something, I'd rather not do it. So eventually I got to the point where I was just tired of trying to look cool by the cool standards of the day. And there was that. What too? I always liked dressing up. I liked tuxes. I liked top hats. I'm not saying I wore them, but I liked the idea of them. I liked the look of them. I thought they were cool. That was cool for me. Was these nifty clothes and adult clothes. The kind of clothes that I imagined by the time I was 30 years old, I'd be wearing suits and carrying a briefcase and working in a big glass building and riding an elevator up and down. And these are the things that you think about when you're a kid that is going to mean something. I think I had a dog or a cat, of course, a wife and a couple kids. Those are all the things you're supposed to have when you're 30. Fast forward, spoiler alert, 30 years old, 20 grand in debt, renting a $400 a month room in Colorado, and no kids, no cats, no wife, no job, no briefcase, no suits. Anyway, that's just how life goes. But at the time, that's what I had in my mind, that's what happens by the time you're 30. You're an adult, and this is what you do. So you had one factor. I was fatigued from trying to keep up with the trends and be cool, because it just wasn't happening. And the second thing was I was really tired of school. I never liked school. You could say I loathed entirely the whole school experience. I didn't like it. And to my credit, and I resented having to learn about subjects that I didn't feel were going to have any relevance in my life. And I was vindicated, and I am to this day. The only class I would argue, because I learned to read before I went to school. My mom had me reading books, beforehand, and then the little bit that I was getting in school initially, and I'm just a reader. Like, I liked to read. My milieu, if you will, is writing and English and all that kind of stuff. Like, that was my upside. That was what I was good at. Math, science, anything with numbers. Those were foreign concepts to me. And so I'd resented them, and I would always say, I don't know why I need this. I don't think I'm going to need this in my life. And you're definitely going to need to do it. And look, balancing your checkbook, because that used to be a thing. When I was in school, you had to balance. They were teaching you. Well, they didn't teach you how to do it because it was school. They don't teach you useful things in school. They teach you rudimentary basics, and then they give you a bunch of trick questions on tests to try to make you seem dumber than you are. That's a fact. And same thing with grammar. Why make it so hard? Like, just talk normal. Speak eloquently. You don't need to know why you're speaking eloquently. You don't need to know why you're speaking correctly. It's intuitive. It sounds dumb if you don't. So just talk normal. I know that's not entirely true. For those who aren't of that disposition, speaking or writing properly, if it doesn't come naturally, you have to learn the rules, because otherwise it's just not intuitive. Same thing with math. I would have to learn the rules. But here's the funny thing. Both math and English, they just break the rules all the time. They say, there's an exception to every rule. No, there are so many exceptions that might as well not even be a rule. It's a suggestion. It's saying, hey, this is what we think. This is a good baseline, and it applies 10 or 15% of the time. The rest of the time, it's going to be breaking the rule, and we're going to make up BS reasons of why we're breaking the rules all the time. It's the most ridiculous. I just don't know. I don't know if it's that way in every country, like every language, I should say, but I know English is that way. It's like, what was it? I before E except after C. And if I'm not mistaken, I'll have to look this one up too. I think there are a lot more exceptions. Now, I might be wrong, but we're still, why? If we say this is a rule, see, here's the thing. There's two different ways to live your life. One is to say, here is the rule. Here is the moral. Here is the value. I believe this is a value. I believe this is a moral. I believe this is morality, or this is a form of morality, or part of morality. And I believe this is a rule. Now, what can I do based on that rule? And if that rule starts taking away options or opportunities or good things, okay, you need to adjust the rule. Don't make an exception to it. Adjust the rule. Figure out what it is that makes what you're actually trying to avoid, or what you're trying to communicate through that rule, and figure out a way to word it as such that you can hold on to it. Now, that doesn't mean everything is absolute. Only Sith deal in absolute, which is also an absolute, but we're not going to get into that. But you can either do it that way, or you can say, I want these things to be true, or I want to do these things, or this is how I want to form words. Therefore, I'm going to make a rule retrospectively or retroactively that allows me to do all the things that I want. Morality. Well, I want to do this, I want to do this, and I want to do this. So I can't say I think it's bad or it's immoral to do this, because if I say it's immoral to do that, it means I can't do these three things. So I need to come up with a version of morality that allows me to do these three things, but still is a rule of some kind. And I'm not going to go into too much specifics of that. We got a lot of that these days. It's people deciding what is moral. But the big problem with that is anytime there's an exception, instead of saying, well, you know what, that actually violates the moral that I've set out, the law, the rule that I've made for myself, so I'm not going to do it. Instead of doing that, okay, let me figure out a way to make this an exception. Well, it's okay this time. And so then that's when you end up with a lot of hypocrisy, because you say, I'm not going to do these things. And then when it becomes convenient, well, then we break the rules, we change the rules. So I don't know. I think rules are flawed in a lot of ways, but why? Why is it I after E except after C? Like, can we just spell it where I becomes I before E all the time? Like, how about we start with that rule, and then when you go to spell a word and you're like, conceive, I before E except C. Yeah. And say, well, whatever idiot said, oh, I want to spell it C-E-I-V-E. And you say, well, then we'd have to make an exception to the rule. Well, sure, let's make an exception to the rule then. No, just say, no, I before E, always. That's just the way it goes. That's the rule. So you have to spell conceive. I hope I'm spelling this correctly, but C-O-N-C-I-E-V-E. That's conceive, period. End of story. Like, we don't need your exceptions. Let's just make that the rule, and you abide by the rule when you're spelling your new words. I don't know. I don't understand. Anyway, why was I saying exception to the rule? I don't know. Oh, school. Yeah, how worthless it is. Anyway, so yeah, you do need to learn how to read. You do need to learn how to write. You need to be able to do basic arithmetic. So you know when you go to buy groceries, yes, okay, well, this is 4, this is 7. Even though in America, of course, with the tax, the way it's done, I don't know why. How hard is it to just adjust the price to reflect what the cost will be with tax? Like, the tax rate doesn't fluctuate day to day. So if it's 10% tax, then just put 10% on the actual item. They do that in the UK. I remember that was the crazy coolest thing. The price of the item is the price of the item. You don't have to worry about what taxes are. So if you grab a hat and a sandwich, weird shopping, but okay, and the hat is £5.23. I don't know exactly how they say the things over there anymore. I £5, £5. Those are the same thing, but I don't know how they add cents. Well, maybe they just round up or round down and they don't even use it. But I just remember being blown away when I did the quick math. I was like, all right, this should come out to about $9.50. I said about $9.50 because even though it comes out to exactly $9.50, obviously I'm used to the American thing where it's going to be, okay, well then 10% tax, that's going to be 95 cents plus $9.50. So roughly $10.45, I guess, ish, right around there. So if I have $11, I'm good to go. But I went to the register and it was $9.50 exactly. So I was like, whoa, I can actually know exactly what it is without having to do in the math or knowing what the sales tax is or any other taxes that are involved. Because that's the thing too. You could say, okay, the state has a 10% sales tax. Well, but then the store has its own little whatevers and it's doing its thing. So it's like, just when I go to the register, tell me exactly the amount I need to do this with. Don't make it like where it's a hidden thing. And that always kills you on these big purchases. You know, you're like, I remember shopping for a laptop, I think it was, one of my first laptops, or my first laptop, which was like my first big ticket purchase. And it was like an $800, $700 compact. And yes, it went on a credit card because I was required to have a credit card for a trip that I took. And so I had to get one, and that set me off on my downward spiral of financial distress for quite some time. But it was like $700 or $800. It was a compact Presario. They don't even make them anymore. I think compact merged with HP. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, you know, you're shopping and you're thinking, okay, sticker price. Okay, that's $6.99. You're like, great, cool. Like, that's you kind of in your head. Okay, if I'm working 20 hours a week and I do all this stuff, again, basic arithmetic, good to have. I'm like, all right, I'll have it paid off within 6 months, no problem. But the tax on something that's $700, roughly sales tax 10%, is $70. That's almost another $100. So I remember being all excited, get it. And then I get to the register and they're like, okay, $770. And I'm like, I'm handing my credit card. I'm like, I went through with it, but I wasn't handing it to them anymore. My hand kind of paused there and she kind of had to reach out and take it from me. And I let it go. I didn't give a tug of war. It wasn't anything comical like that, but it was just kind of like, but that's another $100. I specifically didn't get a laptop that was $800 because I said, I don't want to be spending $800. $700 is my limit, but now you're telling me I have to pay another $70. So it gets you. And then of course, cars, the bigger the purchase, the bigger that tax becomes. And it just is like, what? I'm going to finance $17,000 for a car. Well, no, you're financing $20,000 just because the tax. It's like, Anyway, okay. So we've strayed, but talking about education, arithmetic. Yes. Basic things you need to learn. Yes, absolutely. But you know what? That's all covered. You can do that easily within 2 years, if that. You can get people up to speed on the basics, get them really going. Now, to be fair, I remember we called it Around the World, and it was a flashcard multiplication or addition, subtraction. They were flashcards. And so you'd have a student in our classroom was kind of set up in kind of a big U shape, at least that particular year. And so you really could go around the room. And so you'd have somebody, the first two people would stand up and flashcard, and whoever said the answer first, they would go through. The next person would sit down. The loser would sit down. That the winner would go to the next person in line. The flashcard, and then whoever, and then so whoever won would keep going. And so you'd get somebody usually would go like 5 or 6 people, and then somebody would topple the champ, and then that person would go. And maybe they'd get toppled by the next person, and then they would go. And so it was just kind of one of those things. It was always a nerve-wracking thing, especially if you were winning, because it was just like you were going around the world and like, oh, bam, another one down. And I had my moment in the sun. I think I went part way around the world. I don't think anybody ever made it all the way around, and which was hard because obviously if you started in the middle, that meant you had to go all the way back around to your own seat to go around the world. So I don't think anybody got all the way around, but a lot of us got, we felled like 8 or 9 people before we ourselves were toppled. So it was kind of cool. But and I think that went up through like 4th grade or 5th grade. Really? Maybe 3rd grade. That sounds about right. Miss Garber? Sure. Anyway, like there is a good a case to be had for that kind of stuff. But all the other crap you learn, history and all this, it's absolutely worthless. Absolutely worthless. And I know, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Well, have you noticed how much history repeats itself, and yet people refuse to acknowledge that's what's happening? It's not a matter of, oh, well, I took history, I know what happened historically. Well, no, you don't. One, because the books only tell you certain, so much. They can only tell you so much. Like, that's part of it. It's not their fault. The books are limited. Unless it's going to be like this big in a year, you're only going to be able to learn like this much. And so each event or period in history is only going to have a certain amount of time. So you're only going to learn so much. And you think there would be enough cumulative over all the years that you'd be able to cover a huge span of it. But a lot of it repeats. A lot of it is cyclical. A lot of it is just, you've got an entire paragraph that's telling you about this one little rebellion thing. And it doesn't tell you, a lot of it is, it's not telling you the why. It doesn't give you the background. It tells you what happened. Knowing what happened is not even like half the picture. Like, context is important, and so is our causes. And those are very complicated, and they don't want to get into that. They don't get into that. So they just tell you, oh, this is what was done. This is what was said. And it's like, yes, but why and how? You don't avoid repeating history by saying, well, we don't want this event to happen. Okay, great. But what led to that event? Because there's a lot of people out there, who don't understand causality. They don't see that a policy, this particular policy, can very easily lead to, not the policy itself, but it sets a precedent, and that precedent can be abused, it can be manipulated, and that's the process that ends up in a horrific social event or world event or something, or like the stock market crash. They'll cover some things for causality, but again, they're very basic and they're very unique. It's not so much the underlying cause. Like it wasn't about this particular stock tanking and therefore X, Y, and Z. It's how people were dealing with their money, how the market was being manipulated or was being portrayed, or, there's a lot of stuff. And again, it's very complicated, but I would rather have one subject or one event that we really just plumb the depths of and go, okay, let's start. Day one is this horrible event, this horrible tragedy, whether it's a world war or whether it's, whatever it is. It doesn't even have to be that big, but just something crucial and something where we go, we never want this to happen again. And you spend the year or maybe half a year or, 3 months or something going backwards and say, okay, and here you can see this is where the problem started. Now, obviously, it's never going to be that clean cut, definitive, but the idea of going, well, the more we go back, the further we go back, okay, at this point, were we trending in that direction? What was it really definitively that started moving us in that direction? It was this pivotal case of blah, 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 which set a precedent, which allowed for these things. And therefore, and you see, because of that precedent, because people were allowed to do those things, this is the next event that came up. And because it was already set up because of this law, this court case was ruled this way, which started fermenting the bitterness and the resentment. Because now, you know what I'm saying? Like, it really needs to explore that more, because literally just saying this point in time happened, don't let that happen again. Well, that's pretty easy, but we have things nowadays that are going on that people do not, they refuse to believe that is history repeating itself, or that we are here now because of something that they think was innocuous or was totally fine 20 years ago. And it actually wasn't. It was actually poison. But you introduced it into the system because you felt bad because whatever, or it seemed like the right thing to do, or whatever the reason was. So you said, okay, we're going to allow this, or we're going to make this normal. We're going to do this. And then you go, okay, well, now here we are. Do not see how this begets this, begets this, begets this? It's crazy. Anyway, so we don't learn the functional even part of it, the helpful part of history. A lot of it is missed out on. And just like, I think it became, I'm only now hearing it with any frequency, but the first iteration of like, don't trust whatever you just see is you can't believe everything you see on TV. First, it was like ads, advertisements, part of a complete breakfast. Well, yes, when your breakfast consists of toast, orange juice, milk, apple juice, and pretty much the food pyramid. That's essentially what it was. Those commercials for cereals, they showed you the food pyramid on the table with a little bowl of cereal in there, and they call it part of a complete breakfast. Technically, I mean, I guess you need sugar, but it was like, yeah, because everything else is like that's all the healthy stuff. That's all the actual good stuff. Your cereal isn't actually it's globbing onto. It's not, I keep wanting to say hijacking. It's not hijacking. It's hitchhiking. It is hitchhiking on a complete breakfast. It is not really part of it. It just, you featured it as part of a complete breakfast, but it's not complete because of your cereal. It's complete in spite of your cereal. And arguably your cereal is actually making what is being provided a little less healthy. So it's just a crazy thing. But things like that, you go, okay, you can't believe everything on TV. They show an ad. Oh, wow, so cool. The spitting soldiers going at fighting in the sky. This is awesome. And then you get the thing and they don't even hit. Like, you can't even get the darn thing. You know what I'm talking about? Those little spinner, you spin them, and they try to do it where it was like, they try to make it like it was air combat, but you could never, and the commercial would show them like banging together in the air. And it's like, whoa, awesome. He totally knocked him out of the sky. But it's like, then you actually did it and they just kind of went off in opposite directions. And that was provided. They only came in packs of one. So you had to either buy two or you had to have a friend. And I never had friends that wanted to get those. So anyway, yeah, so I've gone all over the place. I thought about naming these videos to help people out so that you'd know like what you're in store for. But like, this is a perfect example. I was initially talking about wearing suits to class, and we never even got there. We never got to the point of wearing suits to class. We ended up going and we're talking about random toys on commercials. So it's really hard for me to write titles for these because they're all over the place. But you know what? Anyway, I mean, that's just what it is. I'm going to wrap this up now. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, it is greatly appreciated. Rumble, I see you out there, and it is good to be talking with you, and YouTube as well. Obviously, there's that. Well, I don't know why I divided it. People are watching, and so I'm grateful for that. Thanks for rolling with whatever it is I happen to be saying. But yeah, I will talk to you tomorrow. Take care.